The first card of the deck, Awakening. Maybe I should start that again. The first card, no. The first card of the deck is Awakening. And the reason why I thought Awakening needs to be the first card of the deck, I mean, it may seem obvious to you because of the word awakening, but the reason for me putting that at number one is because following your calling, which is the name of the oracle card deck, well, I don't know if it'll exactly be the name, but that's what it's about. Following your calling, that deeper calling, usually comes after some kind of awakening. But as I clarified that to myself today, I questioned, is that actually true though? Because, you know, like a drop of water in the ocean doesn't need to realize it's the ocean before the ocean moves it, you know, with its waves and things. And just the same for us, is we don't need to be awake fully to our true nature to feel the calling of the divine through us necessarily. You know, we get inspiration at any level, at any stage of awakening, of becoming, and desire as well. And those are the impulses that move us, propel us forward, aren't they? So this is the thing with creating content or creating a book, right? Is that you have to choose what you're going to say and put it into some order, and it can take a little bit to actually agree with yourself on certain things, and perfectionism comes into play, doesn't it? And this is what I'm kind of struggling with as I work on this first card of the deck, Awakening, because I'm saying, is awakening the first, or is it inspiration? Is it inspiration? Because when I went through an awakening, I was inspired to go to a, you know, it started it off really. I got inspired to go to a, what are they called, psychic fair. And even before that, I won $100 on a scratchy ticket, right? And I thought, oh, I'm going to go to the psychic fair that's on. I don't think I'd ever been to one before. You know, I was 19 at the time. And even the craziness of my life at the moment was that I actually got stoned before I went to the psychic fair. As a teenager, right? That's what we did. And so, yeah, but what inspired me to go to that psychic fair? Because at that psychic fair is where I bought the book that I did the meditations from, that one of those meditations like brought me into this awakening experience that changed my whole life, you know. So was it awakening, you know, at the beginning, or was it inspiration? And I really don't know. What do you think? Put it in the comments. What should be the first card of the deck? Should it be inspiration, desire? Should it be awakening? In any case, whatever I decide, you know, this process of creating, writing material, and, you know, it's almost, it's art, isn't it? And it has its own unfoldment process. So I'm trying not to be too perfectionist about it as I make a start, but just really doing it, you know, and then letting it reveal itself as I write more, as I think more, as I question more, letting the order of the cards reveal themselves and what each card is really going to be about and all of that. So awakening, the meaning of that card anyway, wherever it is in the deck, is all about, it's the awakening. No, wait a minute, let's cut that and change that. So there are 3 points that I want to make with the term awakening. So so I don't know if I said in my first video, but my idea for these cards is that I want to have a manual that goes with them, but that manual can be a read alone book. Like, you don't have to have the cards, or you don't have to be using the cards to read the book. It's a very simplified, helpful version of the process of following your calling and all of the ins and outs of that. But however, it is also the guidebook or the manual of what you look up, when you pull a card. So you can use it for either or both. And so when I'm thinking about the topic of awakening, what I want to write about that in the book, and this is the hard bit, is that I've got to simplify it. Because you could talk about awakening forever. There's so many different things you could reference. There's so many different experts saying different things, and I go into this overwhelm of what the heck should I be including and not including when I'm talking about this. And this is where I can get tied up in knots. So I'm just trying to simplify my message of the most important things that I feel are needing to be shared about awakening. And at the moment in my creation process, those 3 important points are, I wrote them down here in my little diary, is that awakening is not just happening in the mind and the emotions and in the awareness of a person. It's a physiological process. It's as Richard Rudd talks about it in the Gene Keys, in the 55th Gene Key. If you've ever looked into the Gene Keys, I recommend. Very interesting. That it is a mutation of our DNA. So it's actually, I look at it like it's like the ripening of fruit. It's an evolutionary process. An apple's evolutionary process is, first of all, to grow into an apple, and then to ripen, and then to fall from the tree, and then, whatever. But once it started to ripen, it can't go back to being unripe. And this is what I realized with horror when I went through my awakening. So the veil got whipped from my eyes in a very short amount of time, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all these things differently. I'm seeing things as they really are. I've remembered this true nature of myself to some degree. I've grown, and that means when you grow with such ferocity like that, which is what happened with me, all these other things in your life change. The ripple effect is just what you were interested in changes, your friend group changes, all sorts of things fall away and dissolve and change. And that was the scary bit for me. I wasn't ready for that. It was an uprooting of all of my belief structures. It was brutal, absolutely brutal. And I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to how I was. I wanted to cover over the awareness that I'd now uncovered. And that was what I realized, is that once you have grown, once you've seen something differently, or through the eyes of the true nature, or you've taken off the veil of something that was clouding your vision and seen it clearly for the first time, you can't go back. You can't put the veil back on, And yeah, it's like that ripening of the fruit. It's a process, and it's happening to the larger, maybe the cosmos, the earth, the sun, humanity. It's this process of evolution that's on its way of happening, and it personifies through each of us individually, and we all have our own unique experience of that awakening and unfolding happening. And that was the first point. That's the first point I want to make, is that it is a process that cannot be reversed, and it's happening everywhere. And the second point that I want to make about awakening is that it what is it? Is that it feels like a And the second point I want to make about awakening in this book is what it feels like. And I've written in, the kind of the rough copy of the book, I suppose. It's only like one page so far. But it says, and it's, this isn't the finished version, but it's something like, it feels like waking up from a veil of sleep. You were unaware you were under. But all of a sudden you see it clearly, you see the truth, you find your deeper truth. You reclaim pieces of you that you weren't aware that you lost, but now you remember them with vivid clarity. And there can be an overflow of emotion as you rekindle with this greater you that had been denied for so long. And it's really like that. Awakening is an awakening from a slumber that you didn't know you were in, a spell you didn't know you were under. And all of a sudden you can see it differently. And once you've seen it with these fresh eyes and these eyes of truth, you cannot go back to seeing it the other way. And it's so profound. It can be very little things that we suddenly see with great lucidity, and we see how we've been thinking, we see how we've been behaving, we see the underlying current, the spell we've been living under. And all of a sudden we wake up and we look at it and we go, wow, I was doing that. And now that you've seen it, you can't go back in. You can never be under that spell again. It's a whole new level you've come to when you have an awakening. It can just be a little thing, a very, very subtle little thing you realize, or it could be a big, massive thing that changes your whole paradigm. And the last point that I want to make is, what are we awakening from and to? Generally and en masse and overall, it's an awakening. It's a waking up from the dream of separation and the dream of the personal self into the realization and the awakening into our unity and our collectiveness and our oneness. And sometimes those words have been so used so many times that they can just, be meaningless, because if you don't have a personal connection with that yourself, it can be just words, and I suppose everything I'm saying here is the same. If you get it, you get it, But let's just think about this awakening for a moment, and that it is the spell we've been under, where we have believed for so long, that we are only this physical form, and that's it. This is the be all and end all of what I am. When this physical form dies, I die. I'm separate from everything else. Look, you can see my boundaries are here. and it's that very primitive, almost animalistic way of thinking and being in the world that we're waking up from, to realize the physical body isn't the be all and end all of us. We aren't just this organism, this physical apparatus. There is something animating that. There is a non-physical self, and that non-physical self extends into everything. Doesn't have boundaries in the way that the physical body has, and all the things that quantum physics says and all of that is the awakening to realize, actually, the things I thought were real aren't actually. There's this whole other paradigm, a whole other reality, and it's waking to see that. And the biggest thing about this is that it's the shift from victim into creator. And this is the biggest, most important thing about it, because when you think you're a separate self, a physical body, you feel limited, you feel powerless, you feel victimized by the outside world. And that's that whole paradigm of thinking. I'm a victim to what happens in my life. What happens in my life and around me and the world defines me, defines what I can and can't do, and limits me and gives me an identity. Whereas when you've woken up to realize the true nature and your infinite self, you realize that you are not a victim. In fact, you are generating this whole movie. You're doing it to yourself. The whole thing is being generated and projected from the control room within, which is all of your thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, perceptions, paradigms, reactions, responses, all of that. It is all being projected, and therefore you have the power to do something about it. And that's the awakening, you know, from victim and that very horrible pinch of powerlessness into creator, that we are generating our reality. Therefore we can generate something. We can generate whatever we like once we reach a certain level and release, you know, a lot of these unconscious kind of programs that are kind of pulling the reins of our experience without our awareness. Once we awaken to see more and more and more of those underlying currents for what they are, then they have no power over us anymore. And we're continually taking our power back, taking our power back, taking our power back, until finally what thoughts we think have so much power because they don't have that resistance of the underlying unconscious material forcing it in another direction. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's like, you know, when we go to create something or manifest something, and we can think about it as much as we like, we can do affirmations, we can, you know, the whole process of whatever works usually, but sometimes it doesn't work. And why is that? It's because there's these other forces in our being that we weren't aware of yet, that were pulling the reins under the veil of our awareness. But do you see that once we keep seeing these and clearing these and clearing these, once there's not that many of them under there pulling the reins and distorting our experience, then we can just really, it can be as simple as thinking about something and having it show up. You know, there's not all that wishy-washy stuff in between. And we are heading in that direction. Isn't that awesome? So hey, this is my first card I'm working on, awakening. Let me know what you think. Should it be awakening, the first card? Should it be inspiration? And what would you put on the image of that card? I've been thinking about that too. Would it be an eye? Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But anyway, we'll talk about it more in the next video.